In 1978, a significant transformation began in China mainland as the nation embraced the policy of reform and opening up. This shift marked a transition from the rigid confines of a planned economy to the dynamic landscape of a market-oriented one. As this reform journey commenced, the central government made a pivotal decision to decentralize fiscal management powers, distributing them to local governments. With this move, local authorities gained newfound independence in crafting budgets and enjoyed a measure of fiscal autonomy. They could make decisions about budget expenditures and even had the opportunity to share budget revenues with the central government. However, this newfound fiscal autonomy also came with a potential downside. China adopted a fiscal system known as the fiscal contracting system, categorizing fiscal revenue into three distinct types: central fixed revenue, local fixed revenue, and central local shared revenue. Local governments were required to remit a predetermined amount of fiscal taxes to the central government each year. Yet, driven by local interests and incentives, some local governments employed tactics such as reducing corporate taxes. In doing so, they indirectly retained tax revenues within their own regions, accumulating wealth within local businesses. This approach inadvertently pushed the central government into a financial quagmire. In fact, the situation became so dire that, on two separate occasions, the central government had to turn to local governments for financial assistance, effectively borrowing money from them. By 1982, the need to support colossal projects in the energy and transportation sectors prompted the State Council to introduce the National Energy and Transportation Key Construction Fund, guided by principles of mandatory taxation and gratuitousness. Subsequently, in February 1989, the central government initiated the National Budget Adjustment Fund as a measure to ease the fiscal crisis. Unfortunately, despite these efforts, the central government's financial situation remained far from stable. As the year 1993 approached, just before the impending tax-sharing system reform, the proportions of national fiscal revenue to the gross domestic product and the share of central fiscal revenue in the overall fiscal income plummeted rapidly. Central government fiscal revenue accounted for a mere 22% of the total, while local governments controlled a whopping 78%. In terms of fiscal expenditures, the central government accounted for 28.3% of the total, with local governments responsible for 71.7%. The central fiscal deficit persisted for several years, negatively impacting vital areas such as national defense and essential investments. This created an unprecedented scenario in the history of the People's Republic of China, a weakened central government struggling to maintain fiscal stability amid sweeping economic changes. In 1993, China found itself facing a pressing fiscal challenge. The China National Capability Report, co-authored by prominent Chinese economists Hu Onggong and Wang Xiaoguang, had sounded the alarm. It highlighted a dramatic decline in the central government's fiscal revenues, raising deep concerns, particularly the fear that China might follow the path of disintegration witnessed in the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia. This report grabbed the attention of the central government, and it was clear that something needed to change. As a response to this crisis, China swiftly initiated a comprehensive fiscal and tax reform, with the main focus being on the introduction of a new tax-sharing system. The wheels of reform began to turn rapidly. On April 22, the Politburo Standing Committee of the Communist Party of China listened attentively to reports from the Minister of Finance, Liu Zhongli, and the Director of the State Administration of Taxation, Jin Yixin, regarding the proposed fiscal and tax system reforms. Just 6 days later, on April 28, the same Politburo Standing Committee approved the basic framework for tax reform. They also appointed then Vice Premier Zhu Rongji, a seasoned leader, to spearhead the pivotal reform efforts. In a remarkable display of dedication and leadership, Zhu Rongji embarked on a journey across the country. From September 9 to November 21, spanning a mere 74 days, he personally led delegations of officials from various central government departments, including finance, taxation, and economic and trade affairs, to visit 17 provinces, autonomous regions, and directly administered municipalities, which included planned single-city municipalities. During these visits, he explained and discussed the tax-sharing system proposal with local governments, seeking their support and understanding. It was a challenging process, as the reform involved reshuffling financial resources and impacted the interests of various stakeholders. In the end, through a series of negotiations and compromises, both the central government and local governments reached a consensus. The tax-sharing system reform was officially set in motion on September 3, 1993, when the Politburo Standing Committee of the CPC approved the reform plan. Just 6 days later, on September 9, the People's Daily published a summary of a symposium titled Unified Understanding of Accelerating Fiscal and Tax System Reform. This discussion addressed issues related to the tax-sharing system reform. In the tax-sharing system reform plan, the central government reallocated various taxes, designating those that were stable, had a broad base, and were easy to collect to be primarily under its purview. This included categorizing consumption taxes and tariffs as central government's fixed revenue sources. The reform also redistributed enterprise income taxes based on the taxpayers' affiliations, dividing them between the central and local governments. Value-added tax, VAT revenue was shared in a 75-25 ratio between the central and local governments, with the central government receiving the larger share. This monumental reform was not without its challenges, as it involved multiple interests and required a careful redistribution of financial resources. However, Zhu Rongji's tireless efforts in navigating this complex landscape, along with a spirit of cooperation and compromise between the central and local governments, laid the foundation for the reform. The implementation of the tax-sharing system reform marked a significant milestone in China's fiscal system, providing a solid footing for the country's economic development and fiscal stability. On December 25, 1993, a significant turning point in China's fiscal policy unfolded when the State Council released the decision on implementing the fiscal management system of tax-sharing reform. This momentous decision marked the initiation of a fundamental reform in local fiscal management across all provinces, autonomous regions, directly administered municipalities, and planned single-city municipalities, commencing on the first day of 1994. The decision encompassed several key components. Firstly, it delineated the division of responsibilities between the central government and local governments. Under the new system, the central government shouldered expenditures related to national security, diplomacy, central government agency operation, essential expenses for adjusting the national economic structure, coordinating regional development, and implementing macroeconomic control. On the other hand, local governments were responsible for the operational expenses of local government agencies and expenditures needed for local economic and program development. The reform also redefined the allocation of specific taxes between the central and local governments. Central taxes were those crucial for national interests and macroeconomic control, while taxes directly linked to economic development became shared taxes. Taxes suitable for local management were classified as local taxes. This reallocation aimed to increase central government revenue sources, ensuring a unified legal framework for central and local taxes to maintain a level playing field and a unified national market. In 1994, the tax-sharing reform led to the redistribution of central, local, and shared taxes, strengthening the central government's financial base. This reform maintained central legislative authority over these tax categories, ensuring uniform policies, protecting national interests, and promoting equal competition among enterprises. Central government fixed revenue sources encompassed customs duties, consumption taxes and value-added taxes, collected by customs, central enterprise income taxes from local banks, foreign-funded banks, and non-banking financial institutions, as well as revenues collected centrally by the Railway Department, various bank head offices, and insurance company head offices. Additionally, the central government received profits from central enterprises. Central government also bore the cost of export tax rebates for foreign trade enterprises. Local government fixed revenue sources included local administrative fees, expenditures related to public security, partial militia program expenses, local investment in basic infrastructure, expenses for local enterprise technological upgrades, and new product development, support for agriculture, rural areas, and farmers, urban maintenance and construction expenses, as well as expenditures related to local culture, education, healthcare, and more. Furthermore, the reform introduced revenue-sharing mechanisms, particularly in the case of value-added tax, VAT with a 75% share for the central government and 25% for local governments. Resource taxes were split 50-50, while securities transaction taxes initially followed a 50-50 split, later transitioning to full central revenue the first day of 2016. To complement the reform, China implemented various supporting measures, including restructuring the tax system, eliminating outdated taxes, introducing market-oriented tax systems such as a VAT-based system, and discontinuing certain levies like the Energy and Transportation Infrastructure Fund and the Budget Stabilization Fund. The reform also emphasized the need for equitable fiscal resource allocation among regions, balancing the interests of developed and less developed areas. It established a system of tax rebates and transfer payments correlated with economic development levels, protecting the interests of provinces, cities, and impoverished regions alike. Simultaneously, the reform aimed to enhance fiscal discipline at the local level. To facilitate the tax-sharing reform, the People's Bank of China engaged in national debt market operations, allowing state-owned commercial banks to participate in the government bond market. This encouraged financing through government bonds, market-driven interest rates for government bonds, and coordinated management of the secondary government bond market. In essence, the decision on implementing the fiscal management system of tax-sharing reform represented a watershed moment in China's fiscal history. It set the stage for a more equitable distribution of fiscal resources, promoted transparency, and ensured central control over key taxes. This comprehensive reform paved the way for China's economic development and financial stability in the years to come. The year 1994 marked a significant milestone in China's fiscal reform journey. The tax reform of that year signified a substantial step away from the planned economy towards a market-oriented one. This reform addressed issues arising from the previous fiscal contracting system in local governments, leading to a rapid increase in national fiscal revenue. In 1994, the central government's fiscal revenue witnessed an unprecedented growth of 203.5%, with its share in total revenue increasing from 22% in 1993 to 55% in 1994. As the government's fiscal revenue continued to grow rapidly, disagreements emerged between the Ministry of Finance and the State Administration of Taxation regarding the relationship between the state, enterprises, and residents. The then Minister of Finance, Xiang Huai-cheng, advocated for further increasing the government's share of GDP, while Jin Renqing, the head of the State Administration of Taxation, proposed adjusting the tax system with both increases and reductions in mind. Around 2010, as central government fiscal revenue continued to surge, debates arose concerning the direction of fiscal reform between the central and local governments. By 2015, despite central fiscal revenue accounting for 50% of total fiscal revenue, central government expenditures constituted only 15% of total fiscal expenditures. This imbalance exacerbated the misalignment of fiscal responsibilities between central and local governments, posing challenges for local government budgeting and execution. Between 1993 and 2012, national public fiscal revenue increased from 434.9 billion yuan to 5,617.52 billion yuan, a staggering 26.96-fold increase, with an average annual growth rate of 19.2%. The proportion of fiscal revenue to China's GDP also rose. National public fiscal revenue, as a percentage of GDP, increased from 12.30% in 1993 to 22.58% in 2012. The rapid growth in national fiscal revenue, coupled with the significant increase in the central government's share of total fiscal revenue, transformed the previously weak fiscal position of the central government. This institutional transformation ensured stable growth in central fiscal revenue, enhancing the central government's capacity for macroeconomic control. The substantial increase in fiscal revenue provided essential funding for infrastructure development, contributing to China's economic growth and modernization.